back to the channel. My name is Holly, and today we are going to be talking about the DClinPsy application. That is the application process for the UK Clinical Psychology Doctorate training that happens here. So just a little bit of background about me before we get into it. My name is Holly and I have just qualified as a clinical psychologist. If you follow the channel for a little bit, you'll know that I do quite a lot of stuff around how to get onto the course and a little bit of background. I applied 6 times to the course. I interviewed 4 times. Applications 4, 5 and 6 were my interview years, and I had 2 interviews in my final year with 1 successful offer of a place from a reserve place. So I have a lot of experience of writing the application, some successfully, some unsuccessfully, but hopefully the tips that we go through today will be helpful. So it's the first time I'm writing doctor on one of my videos, which is very exciting, and I'm really sorry, but doctor will be everywhere now. Literally everybody I've ever met will know about it. Anyway, so let's get into it, the advice. So the basics then of the DClinPsy. The DClinPsy is a 3-year full-time doctorate program in clinical psychology. The exit award is the DClinPsy. So they are the letters that will be after your name. Just like if you do an undergrad, a Bachelor's of Science, BSc is after your name. And same with BA, if it's a Bachelor of the Arts and things like that. There are 32 universities that offer a course in the UK. All of them are full-time, apart from one offers a part-time option, although I believe there aren't that many people enrolled in that option. So on Clearinghouse, which is the website where you can apply, there are 30 courses, and you can also apply directly to 2 courses. The programme consists of teaching alongside clinical placements and research. Teaching follows the academic terms of the university, so often you won't have teaching when the universities are on holiday, but you will during the academic terms. Often, but not always, it's 2 days teaching and 3 days placement every week, but this really does vary. And a lot of courses now are doing like big teaching blocks where you have 9 to 12 weeks of teaching and then 9 months of placement. So some courses are doing that, some are doing bigger teaching blocks and you only have 1 day of teaching every week. It depends on the course. So check out the Clearinghouse entries, because each course has got an entry on Clearinghouse describing how they run their courses. And as I say, yeah, teaching blocks do vary on each course. So the application basics. You can apply once per year. The applications open in September and close in November. And the applications are then for the following September. So if you're applying in September to November 2024, you would start the course in September 2025. You can apply to a maximum of 4 courses through Clearinghouse. And there's no kind of ranking system. So it's not you choose number 1, 2, 3 and 4. There's no firm and insurance choices. It's just you choose 4 courses to apply to. Places are funded. So course fees and salary are paid by Health Education England, National Education for Scotland and the Welsh Government, depending on where you are in the country. Self-funding is available for a handful of courses. I think it's 8 courses last time I checked, although this is often for, generally it's for international candidates, and there are lots of resources around on Clearinghouse about applying as an international candidate. But to have your course place funded and receive a salary by the NHS, you need to have home fees status. So Clearinghouse has got information on all of this. I'm afraid as I applied as a UK national, I don't have a lot of information because a lot of this is based on my personal experience. So I don't have a lot of information about applying that way. There is a standardised application form that we're going to go through. Everybody fills out the same application form. If you are applying self-funded, you may have to answer a few slightly different questions. This video is focused on the funded places. And you do have to pay to apply via Clearinghouse. It costs money to apply to a job. It costs money. So there are some, I think on X, or Twitter, X, showing my age, there is something called DClinPsy Connect. If you search for it, or DClinPsy Mutual Aid, I think it might be actually, DClinPsy Mutual Aid, it has people like qualified psychologists or other people saying, I can afford to pay for 1 application for somebody this year. And then you can link up. It's not means tested last time I checked. So hopefully that is still going, so I think it's wonderful. You can also save £15 by applying early. So applying by the end of October, I think it is. But check the Clearinghouse website. So here's a timeline then. So we have September, the application's open. via Clearinghouse, and they close in November. The Queen's Belfast application deadline is also in November. Then we have March is the deadline for courses to feedback application outcomes to you. So March is the sort of time where you will hear back from the courses whether you are successful or not. March to May are when the interviews happen. April is the Hull application deadline. And June is the deadline to accept places. So in terms of applying, I know Queen's Belfast might do it slightly differently, so I'd check their website, but Hull and York, you apply directly to them because you have to have done their undergraduate and you have to have done their clinical psychology module in the third year, and there's a few other stipulations as well, but not everybody can apply there. And I think it's only the year that you graduate that you're able to apply to it, and then you have to apply to the wider Clearinghouse system. So let's go into preparing to apply then. Firstly, choosing a course now, and choosing your 4 courses, really, that should say. So firstly, you might want to think about the ethos. We always talk about the ethos of the courses. And this is really what the course sees as important in training. So really what their values are. So there isn't often a really clear, here is what our ethos is, bang, 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 bullet points. It's often kind of woven throughout their entry. So things that you might see in terms of ethos are things like community psychology, systemic approaches, psychodynamic, embedding people with lived experience, reflection, those sorts of values that you might see. And what I would do before you even look at the courses, I would sit down and think about, what do you value in work? What do you value? What sort of psychologist do you want to be? And I think it's sometimes we always have an assumption that all psychologists are going to be very empathetic, very compassionate, and that isn't always the case, actually. You know, working as a psychologist in the NHS is tough, and it's, you know, it can lead to burnout, and it's a lot. And so I think sometimes we do have a kind of compassion fatigue, and some people aren't as compassionate as you might think. So it isn't obvious necessarily to say you want to be a compassionate psychologist. I think that's okay. So I would write down, what sort of psychologist do you want to be, and what things do you value, and then try and find some courses that fit with that. One of the best ways to find out about their ethos and values, I would say, is reading the Alternative Handbook. For anyone that doesn't know, I will link it in the description because the 2025 one has just come out. It's a survey. It's the results of a survey that all trainee clinical psychologists have access to. It's feedback on the course, really, their course. So you can they used to do PDFs, but now it's run by the BPS. They used to do it in a PDF, but now they do it online. So you can go to whichever courses you're interested in and see a whole range of different things that that trainees have rated the course on. Placements, type of supervision that you have, level of support that you have, all those things. So you can really see what the course might be like. The other thing to do is try and talk to some trainees that are on that course. So if you're into the psychology YouTube and Instagram world, there's a lot of people that have got accounts, which is brilliant. So you can reach out to a couple of those accounts. People often reach out to me as well, but definitely you can reach out to people and say, oh, which course did you train on? Could we have a conversation about it? Is that okay? Because everyone's got their own experience. So that is one of the best ways, I think, that you can understand the course ethos from a trainee perspective, which may be slightly different from the course perspective, of course. But yeah, I think that's one of the best ways. Location. So this is where you'll be living and working for 3 years. So it's really important that you think about where you want to live. And you may need to relocate because of the spread of the courses. And also thinking about what are the course arrangements for staying away if you have to. So if you've got a placement really far away, do they provide you, expenses for overnight accommodation? How does that all work? And do they have any requirements for location? So some courses stipulate you have to live in a certain place, depending on university rules or whatever. So definitely check that out. And think about how much commuting you're actually willing to do. Because it's really easy. I said this, saying, oh, I don't mind, I'll commute 3 hours a day, I don't mind. I ended up commuting for like 5 hours a day sometimes, but I had reasons for that. It wasn't necessarily down to the course. So yeah, I think really think about what you're happy to do, because commuting 5 hours for a couple of years is really hard, let me tell you. And there is a reason the courses don't want you to do it. I really get it. Lastly, selection. Okay, so play to your strengths. How do these courses select their candidates for interview? How do they do it based on the application? If your strength is your academic record, apply to the courses that shortlist using that. You know, that's the best way to do it. If your strength is your experience, maybe apply to courses where there is a minimum experience requirement. If actually you don't have that much experience yet and you're not quite sure about your academics, maybe they're not as strong as you would have hoped, maybe go for ones that do shortlisting tests. I was terrible at shortlisting tests, and I learnt that very quickly. So I applied 6 times to the DClin. Regular followers will know that, but if you're new, hello, welcome. I applied 6 times, and the first few times I applied, I had to apply to ones that did shortlisting tests because I didn't have any experience, and all I had were my academics really, but you needed experience. So before they looked at my application, I wanted to do a shortlisting test, and some of them are situational judgment tests, some of them are deductive reasoning tests. I was really bad at all of them. I just couldn't do them. So about application 3, maybe application 4, I stopped applying to those courses because there was no point. I wasn't getting anywhere. I played to my strengths in that and did end up getting on, obviously. So choosing a course, I would think about these 3 things particularly, but there are lots of other things to consider when you're choosing a course. But spending a lot of time thinking about the courses is important, because it's hard to write an application that's kind of thinking about the courses you're applying to if you don't know which ones they are. It's important to write an application that's really true to you, but to do that you need to make sure you're choosing a course that also matches with what you think is important, I think. So the basic requirements of preparing to apply. Basic entry requirements. You need Graduate Basis for Chartership, GBC, from the British Psychological Society. This can be gained from a degree accredited by the BPS. This does include conversion courses. This is by far one of the biggest things I'm asked. People ask me, do I need to be a graduate member of the BPS? I've just got my graduate membership of the BPS. Does that mean I can now apply to the DClin? You do not actually have to be a graduate member. You do not have to do it because it is an expense. You know, you don't have to do it. What you can do is just get your graduate basis for chartership. What that means is that you have done a degree, master's conversion or an undergrad degree, that the BPS have said, yeah, these are the fundamental building blocks of what you need to be a psychologist, but to be a chartered psychologist. You'll obviously need to go on and do further training but that's what you need. But that graduate basis, you have that there. You can get the confirmation of GBC via a letter from your university, sometimes a letter from the BPS as well. So yeah, you'll need that and you need to upload it, but we'll come on to documents. You will need some relevant clinical experience. And maybe there will be courses that will take you straight from undergrad. That's fine, I get that. But I think my personal experience is I'm really glad that I had the several years of experience before I got onto the course, because you know, you start the course, you might have a few weeks of teaching and then a couple of weeks of induction on your placement, and then you're in a therapy room with somebody. And without that experience, that basic stuff about how to build a rapport with somebody and make someone feel comfortable and those sorts of things, and confidence in yourself as a clinician, I think I found it really hard. I found it hard anyway, but I think I would have found it even harder had I got on earlier. So you will need some relevant clinical experience as well. It really helps in teaching because you can draw on experiences that you've had. So yeah, that was something I didn't quite expect. Academic record. So it depends on the course. Some courses will specify that you need to have a minimum of a 2-1 in your accredited degree. Some will not specify. But what they want in an academic record is to see that you may be able to study at doctorate level. Because yes, it is an NHS funded position, but you're also a student at university, and that university will have rules about who can and can't, and whether they would offer a doctorate degree to somebody, you know, but based on can they actually do the academic side of it. My guess is you absolutely can, but they will want to see that in proof. Always check the clearinghouse website and the course websites to understand their criteria. Always check that. So these suitability statements that were once upon a time called references, but they are now called suitability statements. My understanding is because they are your referees, or the people that you ask to provide your suitability statements, are giving information on how suitable they think you will be for training, basically. So you will need an academic suitability statement referee person. And this is somebody who can comment on your academic ability to perform at doctorate level. So this is often a university supervisor. It needs to be someone in a university, really, ideally, because they understand what academics mean at a doctorate level. And often people that are at a university supervising undergrad, master's, PhD supervisors have done a form of doctorate or postgraduate training, so they know what sorts of things may be involved. They should, as I say, they should be from an academic institution where possible. Often people really struggle to have that person, like they've been out of education for a long time, whatever it is. And I know of people that have done masters simply so they can have someone for a suitability statement, which is a shame. But it is important. And I often get asked, can I have a supervisor that supervised me on an audit do my academic reference? I don't know the answer to that often. The way it's designed is that you have a university supervisor. What I would do is contact Clearinghouse, because they need to make that, we need to make sure that the criteria is really clear. So you can contact Clearinghouse or the courses themselves. You may not get much of a response, but that's the best thing I would do, just to make sure. So you will also need a clinical experience reference or suitability statement. This should be somebody. This is lifted from the Clearinghouse website. So the experienced referee should have direct experience of and be able to comment on your performance in a relevant clinical context and or research context if appropriate. Ideally a clinical psychologist, as they need to be able to comment on whether you'll be able to undertake clinical training. That may not actually be lifted. I think I might have written that, but some of it is. So the experienced referee should, the first sentence definitely is, it should be a clinical psychologist because they've been through training and they know what it involves. And I think sometimes if you're supervised by another type of psychological professional, they can understand what a clinical psychologist does, but when it comes to rating, do you think this person's going to be able to do the doctorate? They won't know because they don't have experience of doing a doctorate themselves. So it's hard. It is difficult. One of the things you can do is you can have a look on their Clearinghouse website, and they have a downloadable copies of what the suitability statements look like. So if you're not sure, or you're not sure if your supervisor will be able to help, print it off and bring it to your next supervision and say, I really want to apply to the doctorate, which probably won't be a surprise if you're in a kind of assistant psychologist role or support worker role in a clinical psychology area. So you can print that off and say, look, do you think you'd be able to fill this in? If not, what can we do about that? Are there clinical psychologists that they could get some advice from? Could they, that sort of thing? Because it is a really important part of their CPD as well to be able to write that reference. And it should be your current employer where possible. So if it isn't, you must explain. There is a section in the personal statements where you can explain that. So it could be that you've just started an assistant psychologist job and they don't feel that they're able to give you a reference yet. That's absolutely fine, and it wouldn't be counted against you, because if you've only just started, they couldn't provide an accurate reference yet. So that's okay to just put, it's my previous employer because my current employer has only known me 2 weeks. That's completely okay. Yes, and also some courses do have specific requirements as to who can provide a reference, so make sure you check the Clearinghouse website and the course pages. So now we come to reflection, which is always a tricky thing in this application because it's a bit different to any other application that we're used to. So preparing to apply, reflection then. This is a piece of advice that I had from my second unsuccessful DClin interview. They said you need to use some reflective models to better understand your experiences and how that's going to help you on training. And I think when you come to writing your application, then once you've used some reflective models to reflect on your experiences, you'll have a load of them to choose from. And you can say, yeah, no, I don't think that one quite fits. I don't think that one quite fits. I don't think that one quite fits. We have obviously done loads and loads and loads of stuff on reflective models. It's partly why I started the YouTube and the Instagrams, because I didn't know anything about them. Having done an undergrad and a master's in psychology, I didn't know anything about reflective models. And I couldn't find anything, so I wanted to make it available. And so we have done an applications handbook, which is available in a print copy, but you have to pay for. And we also do PDF downloads. I'll put the link in the description. If for any reason you can't afford that, you don't agree with pay, whatever it is, you don't need to provide a reason. Just drop me an email. My email will be in the description, and I will send you a free copy of that PDF. And the same with this one as well. I never thought I'd actually be asking people for money on any of this stuff, but it is a lot of time that it takes to create these resources. And to also list them and make them publicly available does cost money, and certainly the print ones cost money, so I have to ask. But if for any reason you can't, we are really committed to widening access, and hopefully these will be helpful. So, preparing to apply then. What I would do is think about writing a few lists. You may not include any or all of this in the final application, but it can be really helpful to get you thinking. And the few lists I would write, I would think about the biggest lessons you've learned so far on your journey. I would think about why you want to be a clinical psychologist, and particularly why you want to train at those courses. I would think about your competencies so far and try and cross-reference this with the trainee job description and person specification, which it will be on the Clearinghouse website. Think about what you've developed so far. And then think about which bits of training do your experiences prepare you for. And I think that is a really helpful way to work, actually. Now, thinking back, one of the things that helped me the most was going back to which bits of training do I feel ready for. Well, I didn't feel ready for research, so I didn't really write about that. I didn't feel ready for a lot of it. I didn't write about that. What I did write about was I felt that placements would be my place to excel because I had a lot of clinical experience. So I was like, actually, yeah, which bits of placement? Is it working with multidisciplinary teams? Is it working with clients? Is it working in systems? What sort of work is it? Is it advocacy? So I thought about all those different things and what experience then I had and how I learned my lessons and tried to link all of that stuff together. So I think sometimes it can feel like you need to rush into writing it. For me, I'm very much a planner. I love planning stuff. I remember at school planning essays. I used to it took ages doing it. I loved it. But yeah, I think for me, that's my process. Some people love to write, and that's their process, and that's absolutely fine. But this is something that really helped me. So when I came to writing my application, I started writing about what felt important to me from the lists and linking to training. And one of them was managing imposter syndrome, because I know that is a big thing on training. And actually, like having gone through training, it's quite a big thing just in psychology. And I think in lots of professions, actually, imposter syndrome is a massive thing. Some of the lessons that I'd learned in supervision, particularly around sitting with uncertainty and managing the sort of drive to fix, and also my experience of working with marginalised groups, so people with drug and alcohol problems, people experiencing obesity and weight-related issues, and older adults. And actually, I realised that was all my experience. So it was interesting that I particularly chose those groups and what was it about that and how does that then match training. So I did a lot of thinking before I actually came to write anything. Let's get on to writing the application then. So these are the Clearinghouse sections, okay? We have got your details, your name, your date of birth, your address. We've got funding, which is your UK work eligibility, nationality, self-funding status. Your course centres, which course centres you want to apply to. The basics then, under here you would find your GBC route, so that is how you gained your graduate basis for chartership. So you just have to put in from undergraduate degree, master's conversion, whatever it is. Your language level, so what your first language is, your English language proficiency, and whether you have a disability. Your references, suitability statements. Details of the referees, so their contact details. So then what will happen once you put their email address in, an email will be sent directly to them and that they can fill in their version of it. So you will never see the reference unless you want to see it and you request it, which may or may not be shared with you. One thing I would say about the suitability statements is make sure they're going to write a positive one, right? Because sometimes having a conversation and saying, actually, do you think I'm ready for training? They may say, I don't actually think you are. And I'm not going to be able to write that you are in a reference. Well, then don't waste the money. Because if the reference isn't going to back you up, then you are wasting the money if someone says that you're not ready for it, because it does play a big part in it. Your qualifications. So these are school qualifications and university qualifications. Your experience, which is your occupational, research and any other experience. Your personal statements, 6 standardised questions, which we'll get into. And then the course questions, which actually are now, I think the personal statement section, is course questions. And also they've added questions related to the eligibility to train. So whether you've done a funded course in the last 2 years or not. any documents that you need to add, and then some equal opportunities monitoring. So that is what the whole application looks like. And you'll see there on the left that there's little green ticks next to it. And so I had to log into Clearinghouse and go through it because they changed it. So I had to, since I applied, so I had to look at it. So when there's a green tick next to it, it means you've completed that section and you've marked it as complete. You can still go back and edit it though, that's my understanding. Call centres then. So select the courses that you wish to apply for. You can apply to a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 4. I think you have a high risk to lower risk strategy on that one. If you are really keen, you know, okay, I live in South Wales and I want to stay living here. South Wales is where I'm applying. Fine. They can also see which other courses you've applied to. But as I said, there is no first choice or ranking system. It's just 4 courses and they'll be entered based on their number. So I think that's done alphabetically. So for example, Bangor, I think, is the first one. So Bangor's number 1, Bath is number 2, and so on. So yeah, that's how they'll be entered. And you can change them at any point before you submit. Each course will be designed differently to other courses, and they teach a wide range of modalities and topics. So choosing something that you're interested in. All will teach CBT, all of them, it's a requirement. But the secondary one is up to them. So lots of courses choose systemic, some choose other ones. It really depends on what you're interested in. And as I said, we've talked a little bit about ethos. And we've talked a little bit about ethos as well. So the basics then. GBC route, detailing how you gained your GBC. Language, you're putting in English language and any other language proficiency. And disability, you are choosing to disclose whether or not you consider yourself to have a disability. Some courses run disability schemes, disability positive schemes, I can't remember what they're called, where anybody that meets the minimum criteria and also discloses a disability will be invited to interview. I don't know how many courses do that, and it will say on their website whether they do. It's up to you whether you disclose. You absolutely do not have to. Suitability statements, then we've talked about this. Academic reference, someone who can comment on that. Yeah, so we talked about all of this. Qualifications then, listing all your qualifications from A-level or equivalent. So you will be asked to put in the course title, where you gained it, the year obtained, and the grade as well. You don't need to list any mandatory training or CPD courses unless they provided you with a qualification. So unless you trained to be an ACT therapist, I wouldn't be putting that in there. You know, I'd only be putting in the things that provided you with a certificate of qualification. Experience then. List your paid and voluntary work experiences. So for each role, you follow this format. You put in the date from, so when you started the job, the date you ended the job, and if it's current, I think you leave it blank or write present. You write in how many hours per week, the job title, whether it was paid or voluntary, the country you worked in, the employer and the area of work or research. So it can be NHS or whichever trust you were with, and it could be inpatient mental health, eating disorders, you know, whatever it is. Brief description of main duties. This is 200 characters, and I've seen it done in lots of ways. The way I did it was using little dashes as bullet points, because you can't use bullet points in the actual online application form, but what you can do is little dashes. Oh, no, I didn't. I think I used numbers, actually. I used numbers. So I sort of went 1, so for my assistant psychologist one, I would have said something like 1, clinical assessment of whatever it was, anxiety and depression, 2, working as a multidisciplinary team, 3, research audit, dissemination, you know, conducting research audit, service improvement stuff and dissemination, something like that. So you can write it like that. You can write it in terms of like a list. So you just write all of that stuff separated by a comma. Write it however you like. I personally like the numbers because I think it's quite structured and clear. Yeah, and I think it helps us write in a more concise way as well, I think. The website will then calculate a full-time equivalent number for each role, and that's to help where courses have got a minimum requirement. So if courses have a minimum of 12 months full-time equivalent experience, that is what you need to have across all of the roles. So let's say you've worked in an assistant psychologist role or a support worker role for 20 hours a week for a year, it will calculate what that full-time equivalency is, because that's what they're looking for. You can also add in other experience in the next section. So things like when you've worked in a shop or retail, hospitality, any other work that you've done that doesn't have clinical relevance. So the publications section then. You have 1,500 characters to list any publications / dissemination resulting from your work. And there are some guidance notes. So they ask you to leave this blank if you have not prepared any of your work for publication or dissemination. It is optional, but it's not just for work published in journals or magazines. You could also include service development and or audit work where you disseminate the findings. And disseminating means kind of spreading it is the only thing I can think now. Sharing it with stakeholders, with the trust board, the head of the service. It could be any kind of way you're sharing the findings. Resource development also counts. Social media accounts, perhaps, where you disseminate psychological information, because that's part of the role of a psychologist, is to take some information and research particularly, and then kind of digest it and make it applicable to a situation you're working in, and then share it. And that happens in MDTs, it happens with clients. That's one of the key skills of a psychologist. So if you've got some basis for that, it helps. So you don't just put in published in journals or magazines work. It can be a range of other pieces of work. So try not to leave it blank, because I'm sure some of you will have done this. If you've not done any of this and you've not published anything, probably leave it blank. But if you've done like a poster presentation, that could count too. Background information then. Number 1. There are 2 optional questions on this page with specific guidance about how to answer them. Firstly, any information necessary to explain who you've nominated to write the suitability statements. And it does have some guidance notes in there. And if there's nothing to explain, then you leave it blank. So I left it blank for 5 out of my 6 applications because I didn't have anything to add. I had my current employer and I had my master's supervisor. The one time I did write something was when my master's supervisor was on maternity leave, and so we used the one from the previous year, and I just explained that's why, because she wasn't contactable. So if the reason you would write something is if your experience suitability statement isn't from your current employer, if you've not worked or studied with this person in the last 3 years, explain why you've nominated them. So that can be, like if they were your undergrad supervisor and you graduated 10 years ago, explaining why. This is actually lifted from the Clearinghouse application. You should not normally ask close relations, members of your immediate household, or your business partner to provide the statements. If you cannot avoid nominating such a person, explain why and the nature of the relationship. So they are the things for that question. The next question, there's if there are any other factors and or any further context that are relevant in assessing your application, please give details. And there are guidance notes as well. And leave this blank if there's nothing further to add. So the guidance notes are, if you have a disability and you want to give further details, you can do so here. There is no requirement to do that though, and it's your decision whether you disclose or not. If you wish to give further details of the impact of socioeconomic disadvantage on the opportunities available to you during your education and or working life, please do this here. And if you want to explain the mitigating circumstances for inconsistencies in your academic record or extenuating circumstances, you can do that here. And if you're making a change in career and want to give details. What this is not is a continuation of the first reflective statement. It's not a continuation of that. So this is far more, are there any other textual factors a bit important in assessing the application? So be really careful about what you're putting into that one. And it's completely okay to leave it blank. Yes, and if you've been employed by an individual or family member and have their permission to name them, you should confirm it here. Thinking about the course questions then. So there may be some variation depending on which courses you've selected, but the basic questions are this. In what way have your work and or research experiences made you a better candidate for training? What would you hope to gain from training? And any other information about yourself, which is activities and interests apart from psychology. And whether you've enrolled on an NHS-funded psychological professions training commencing on or after the 16th of October 2023. And that's the date for this year, but it will change each year. So they are, of course, the reflective questions, what used to be called the personal statements. The second bit then. In what way have your... So this is the... So let's go through them each one by one. In what way have your work and or research experiences made you a better candidate for training in clinical psychology? 3,000 characters, which is a bit shorter than a side of A4 typed. The most important thing to remember here is that you cannot write everything that you've learned. You can't do it. If you want to write about stuff to any great depth, you can't write about everything. Okay, and that's not what they're asking. They're asking you to reflect on the things that have made you a better candidate for training. So I would try and pick 3 or 4 things you've learned and link each of those to a specific aspect of training. All right. Avoid listing everything. You've done this already in your experience section. This is about reflection. So don't write. I sometimes read applications where people have written, and I've written these applications myself, and been unsuccessful, writing things like, I am proficient in assessment, formulation, intervention, report writing, discussing with an NDT, formulating as a team, blah, 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 lots of things like that. And then going, that's why I'm a good candidate for training. Undoubtedly, all of those things will make you a good candidate, but that's not reflective. So what was it about those experiences that makes you a better candidate? How have you learned those lessons? Was it always easy to formulate as a team? Was it, were there any challenges that came up? What were those challenges? How did you overcome them? How will you overcome that challenge on training? How will you overcome similar challenges on training? That, I think, is one of the subtexts of this question. The things that helped me, I spent time thinking and planning before writing. As I said, that is undoubtedly one of the most helpful things for me. I didn't worry about the character count until I came to editing. So I wrote huge amounts of stuff and then was like, yeah, I don't like that piece. I don't like that piece. That's not relevant. That doesn't feel as important as this one. I'm going to get rid of it. So I just found it easier to write freely and edit it rather than edit while I'm going. I just found myself writing in a really limited way when I did that. It may be your process though, and that's fine, but this is something that really worked well for me. I also asked a small number of people to read it, and this included my friends and family members to make sure I came across, particularly in a later question, but yeah, throughout. And I think you've got to be careful not to ask too many people to read it, because everyone's got their own opinion and it needs to be your application, not anyone else's. So I always say when I look through applications for people, these are just suggestions. Take them or leave them. It's completely your application. It's completely yours. Next one then. What would you hope to gain from training? So this is a really good place to consider writing about the courses. So which other therapeutic modalities do they teach? Do they have a particular emphasis on working with people from underrepresented groups? Do they focus on people with lived experience? What is their focus, and does that link with you? Other things you can consider: do you have any specific research ideas or areas? Do you have any clinical areas you really want to work in? Which specific competencies do you want to develop? Do you want to develop some more leadership competencies? Is that an area that you want to look at? Do you want to learn more about widening access to psychology? Whatever it is. What about personal growth? Maybe not necessarily to put in there, but you will undergo quite a lot of personal growth in the 3 years. That's been my experience anyway. And you will leave the course a different person to how you entered it often. And maybe not in all the ways, but in some ways you will be. So what about that? Do you have any thoughts about that? The things that helped me were writing freely and then worrying about the character count. So again, just being really free with my writing. And I thought about 2 or 3 things that I wanted to gain. That was the most helpful thing for me. Because again, you can't write everything. You just can't. And it's not necessarily about a list of things. They want to see how you write as well. So other information about yourself, for example, activities and interests apart from psychology. This is mainly about, are you a really rounded person? And I guess, is it about being a rounded person? Yeah, no, I think it is. I think they want to make sure that you have other interests and that you've got other things to say about yourself, and you can show your personality and your values. And I think it can feel a bit like a UCAS form, like Dr. Adam Kay, not doctor anymore, Adam Kay, the comedian now, wrote about how the medical school application form is a bit strange because if you're a good hockey player, does that mean that you're going to be a good doctor? Probably not. So I feel like sometimes it can feel like I am good at hockey and therefore I'm a good clinical psychologist, and that's just not the case. So I think you've got to be careful about how you write it, but thinking about what particular things you would like to show off in that section. Things that helped me were I wanted to make sure that I came across. So this is the one that I asked my friends and family to focus on. I was like, do you think everything that you know about me and love about me, is that in there? Do I come across? So that was the most important tip for me, I think. And you know, I wrote about liking sports, about my pets. Tried to add a little bit of humour in, which is always a bit cringe, but it seemed to work. And my friends said that kind of, I have that kind of dad jokey sense of humour, so so maybe that's why. But that definitely helped me. Contextual admissions then. So this section gathers information about your educational, social and economic background. The data is then compared with polar data about the participation of young people in higher education to contextualise your admission. That is from the Clearinghouse website about contextual admissions. The questions include things like, are you the first generation in your immediate family to attend university? Did you receive free school meals? Have you been recognised as a refugee or have been granted humanitarian protection? You can choose not applicable or prefer not to say. That's completely okay. But those are the things that they will ask you as well as part of the application. What they do with that, I'm not sure. All courses are different and they will have contextual admissions kind of policies that they will follow. So have a check on their page on the Clearinghouse or on their websites. Documents then. You need to attach a range of documents. Typically, this is a letter or a document confirming graduate basis for chartership, your undergraduate degree transcript showing what you got in each module, your conversion course transcript in lieu of if you did a conversion course, and any other higher education transcripts as well. So if you did a master's, they might want to see that. There is a specific place to upload that. Some courses are now asking for a full UK valid driving licence as well, or proof of English language proficiency if you are not British, or English is not your first language, or you did not do a degree in England or Britain, You may be asked for your A-level or equivalent certificates too. Equal opportunities, then you're asked to provide demographic information. You do not have to do this or consent to Clearinghouse using your information, but you're asked to give your age, your gender, country of permanent residence, marital status, disability status, religion, ethnic group, things like that. So we've come to the end. The final tips I have for you is take your time. I think fresh eyes can be really helpful. And one of the things that helped me the most was writing a bit, having something I was quite happy with, taking a couple of days away and then coming back to it. Because then I was like, what was I thinking? What am I doing writing that in there? Take that out. And I think it's a really helpful thing. So I would do that a few times before you share it with anybody. Because I think you have to have a really clear idea of what you want to come across in there before you share it with anybody else. And yeah, don't ask too many people because your voice can become diluted, and it's important that you write what you want to in your application. And for me, it's all in the planning. Again, you may be someone that can write it, and that's great. I'm just not that person. But if that is your process, full respect to you, you go and do that process. My process is I need to plan, and then I need to write, and then I need to edit. That's my process. Getting the basics right. You have to remember that this is formal writing. Your writing is kind of like an academic writing audition. So there are lots of little things that you shouldn't do. Like you shouldn't use acronyms unless you write them out first. So you can just about get away with NHS. You might get away with CBT. MDT is one that everyone knows all of these, but in academic writing, you need to write this stuff out first. So you need to write multidisciplinary team and then in brackets, MDT. And then close brackets, and then thereafter you can use MDT. So little things like that. Ensure you aren't using contractions like I just did. So don't use don't. It should be do not. Little things like that. It's academic formal writing. And numbers, again, this is a big one. Numbers 1 to 9 should be written as words. 10 can be either. 10 can be 10 in words, in like letters, or 10 in figures. But numbers over 10 need to be in figures, so 11, 12, 13, and so on. So that I know it sounds like little things, but don't give them a reason to reject you. This is really important stuff, and you need to make sure that you're showing what you can do. And again, don't start a sentence with an acronym or number in figures. Don't do it. If you're starting a number with, starting a sentence with 25 years ago, I lived in wherever, you need to write 25 in letters. And starting a sentence with an acronym, instead of saying CBT, competencies are things that I've developed, whatever. You wouldn't like that anyway. But don't start it with CBT. You need to start with my competencies in CBT. You can write it that way. But those little things, I can't tell you how many times I have to make that recommendation on people's applications. And I think there are lots of reasons that you may struggle with this, and that's completely fine. But you can explain that within are there any other factors? So, for example, if you're dyslexic and letters and spelling is something that you struggle with, that's something you can write about and say, usually, in clinical practice, I'll have Microsoft Word and I'll have things that will correct my spelling, and that's okay. Whereas this is not that. It doesn't correct your spelling or anything for you. So it is tricky, but you can explain that, and that's really understandable. So thank you so much for watching, and I wish you absolutely all the best in terms of your applications. Hopefully you have got all of the information that you need to write the best application that you can write. We've got lots of other videos on the channel for you to have a little look at, and do check out our resources on Shopify as well. I'll put the link down in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and bye-bye.